The year is 1941. The war is 14 months old, and already the math is brutal. In the fields of North Africa, in the frozen forests outside Moscow, on the beaches of Greece and Crete, the same lesson is being written in blood. Infantry without armor dies. Light troops, no matter how brave, no matter how well trained, cannot hold ground against steel. They can slow it. They can bleed for it. But they cannot stop it. The British Army knows this. The American High Command knows this. And somewhere in a converted furniture warehouse on the outskirts of Hanworth, a 45-year-old engineer named Frank Webb knows this better than anyone. Webb has spent the last 11 months staring at the same problem from every possible angle, and every angle leads to the same wall. Airborne forces are, by definition, light. They carry what a man can carry. They fight with what they can strap to their body or fold into a parachute pack. The moment enemy armor arrives, and it always arrives, they are finished. The existing gliders offer nothing. The standard American Waco CG-4A can lift 3,710 pounds. A jeep, a small artillery piece, maybe a handful of men and their equipment. Useful, but not enough, not against a Panzer. Webb has a piece of paper in front of him. At the top, in the formal language of the Air Ministry, it reads, Specification X-27/40, a glider capable of carrying a tank. He has read it so many times the paper is soft at the edges. A tank. Not a light reconnaissance vehicle. A tank. 17,000 pounds of steel, engine and cannon, delivered silently at night, intact, into a field surrounded by the enemy, and ready to fight within 60 seconds of landing. Nobody in the room when this specification was written believed it was possible. Nobody who has read it since believes it is possible. And yet here is Frank Webb still staring at his drawings, because the alternative is accepting that men will keep dying for a problem no one was willing to solve. He starts not with aerodynamics, he starts with a single question. How do you fit a tank inside an aircraft and get it out again under fire in under a minute? The answer, when it finally comes to him at 2 in the morning over a cup of cold tea, is almost embarrassingly simple. You build the aircraft around the hole. Garrett Morrow is 28 years old the first time he sees the Hamilcar. He has been at Tarrant Rushton for 6 weeks, transferred from a standard glider unit after volunteering for what the paperwork calls a specialist heavy lift evaluation program. The paperwork does not explain what that means. Nobody explains what it means. He is told to report to Hangar 4 at 0600 and to tell no one where he is going. He is from Pennsylvania, from a small town outside Harrisburg where his father ran a hardware store and his grandfather had worked the railroads. He grew up knowing how things were built. The weight of materials, the logic of joints and load-bearing structures, and that practical literacy is part of why he was selected. He is not the most decorated pilot in the program, he is not the most experienced, but he asks the right questions and he listens to the answers. He walks into Hangar 4 at 600 on a grey November morning and stops. The aircraft fills the hangar the way a ship fills a dry dock. It is enormous in a way that seems wrong for something designed to fly. The wingspan stretches 110 feet. The fuselage is the height and length of a railway carriage, and sitting inside that fuselage, visible through the open nose section, is a Tetrarch light tank. Not a model, not a mock-up. An actual tank strapped to the cargo bay floor with chains as thick as a man's wrist. Garrett stands there for a long moment, looking at it. Frank Webb walks up beside him. The engineer is unremarkable to look at, middle-aged, slightly rumpled, the kind of man who forgets to eat lunch when he is thinking. But his eyes are sharp, and he studies Garrett the way he studies a stress calculation, looking for the weak points. The fuselage is birch and spruce, Webb says, without introduction, skinned in plywood, steel reinforcements at the load-bearing joints, high-wing monoplane so the entire lower body can be a cargo bay, 32 feet long, 7 feet 10 inches wide, 7 feet 7 inches tall. Garrett looks at the tank. How wide is the Tetrarch? 7 feet 7 inches. That's 3 inches to spare on each side. 3 inches per side, Webb confirms. Yes. Garrett walks the length of the aircraft slowly. He runs his hand along the wooden skin. It is smooth and solid, laminated ply over a framework of ribs, and it does not feel fragile, but he knows what wood does under stress, under vibration, under the sustained load of a 350-foot tow rope behind a Halifax bomber at 150 miles per hour. He has seen what happens when aircraft structures fail. He stops at the nose section. The entire forward face of the aircraft is hinged on the starboard side. It swings open like a door 15 feet tall, exposing the full mouth of the cargo bay. When he stands in front of the open nose, the tank is right there, 30 feet away. Engine off, gun pointing forward, crew hatch closed. The tank drives in under its own power, Webb explains. We deflate the undercarriage struts to lower the fuselage to ground level. The vehicle drives straight in. Landing the same, we deflate the struts again after touchdown. The tank's weight activates a pressure plate on the cargo bay floor. The plate operates a cable and lever system. He pauses. The nose opens automatically. The tank drives out. How long does that take? Under 60 seconds, according to trials. Garrett nods slowly. Then he asks the question that has been forming in his mind since he first saw the aircraft. The flaps, he says, they run on compressed air. Correct. How many times can you operate them? Webb is quiet for a moment. The bottle holds enough pressure for one deployment. Garrett lets that land. One deployment, one approach, one chance to get the speed right, the angle right, the flare right. If he misses the field, overshoots the landing zone, comes in too hot, there is no going around. There is no second attempt. He will either put the aircraft down in the right place on the first try, or he will put it down somewhere else with no flaps and 36,000 pounds of aircraft and tank and crew and no ability to control what happens next. He looks at the aircraft for a long moment. Then he looks at Webb. When do I start training? His name is Sten Cole. Same age as Garrett, 28, same rank, same unit, same Hangar 4, same cold mornings on the Tarrant-Rushton runway, watching Halifax bombers taxi into position to tow something that most of the Royal Air Force still does not officially believe can fly. They become friends the way men become friends in wartime, fast, without ceremony, out of proximity and shared absurdity. They are both doing something that has never been done before, and that creates a bond that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not felt it. Every training flight is a controlled experiment in the edge of what is possible. Every landing is a data point. Every cracked undercarriage strut, every misjudged approach, every moment when the tow rope goes slack and the glider drops 20 feet in a second, all of it goes into the ledger of what they are learning for the men inside it. But by the spring for the men inside it. But by the spring of 1942, the aircraft is not the problem. The problem is that there are almost none of them. The Air Ministry has placed an order for 18 Hamilcars with a delivery deadline of August 1942. The contract has been distributed among a consortium of manufacturers that includes a railway carriage company, a furniture maker, and a cooperative wholesale society. None of them have built aircraft before. All of them have assured the ministry that they can meet the schedule. By September 1942, one aircraft has been delivered. One. Garrett hears this in a briefing room at Tarrant-Rushton, delivered in the flat, exhausted tone of an officer who has already had this argument with 3 levels of command and lost, all 3 times. The production failure is not a rumor. It is the official figure. 18 promised. 1 delivered. He thinks about what that means in practical terms. The planning for a European invasion is already underway in rooms he will never enter, among men whose names he will never know. At some point, no one will say when, but everyone knows it is coming, British and American airborne forces will be dropped into occupied France. They will be light infantry, same as always, rifles, grenades, mortars, courage, and then the panzers will come. Garrett was present for the Bruneval debrief in the spring of 1942, listening to paratroopers describe how they had completed their mission, a brilliant, precise raid on a German radar installation, and then stood on a beach in the dark, desperately waiting for the Navy before German armor closed in. They had done everything right. They had nothing that could stop a tank, and they knew it. And they stood on that beach with that knowledge for a very long time. That is what insufficient production means. That is the consequence of one aircraft delivered instead of 18. Garrett walks out of the briefing room and finds Sten leaning against the wall outside, arms folded, looking at the ceiling. "You heard?" Garrett says. "I heard." They stand there for a moment. The English countryside is grey and flat around the airfield. Somewhere overhead, a Halifax is doing circuits, its 4 Merlin engines droning in the cold air. "We fly everything they give us," Garrett says. "Every aircraft, every available hour. We make the numbers so undeniable that cancellation becomes impossible." Sten looks at him. "How many lifts are you talking about?" Garrett thinks about it. "As many as it takes." What it takes is 2,800 training lifts before D-Day, not 2,800 hours. 2,800 individual takeoffs, tows, releases and landings, each one logged, assessed, written up, each one a case for the prosecution against cancellation. Garrett and Sten and a small group of other pilots from C Squadron fly in conditions that would ground most aircraft, low cloud, crosswinds, near zero visibility, because the operations they are training for will happen at night, over water, with flak, and fear, and 17,000 pounds of tank shifting in the cargo bay behind them. 7 pilots are killed in training, 7 in 2,800 lifts. By the standards of what is coming, that number is almost impossibly low. By any other standard, it is 7 men who died practicing. Each time Garrett completes a training flight and walks away from the aircraft, he does a version of the same small calculation. 1 compressed air bottle, 1 approach, no second chance. He got it right again. He files the report and goes to find Sten. By the spring of 1944, the Hamilcar is no longer a secret inside the program. It is a rumor outside it. Ground crews at Tarrant Rushton have seen the aircraft. Bomber crews who have towed it on training exercises have talked carefully and only to people they trust about the extraordinary thing they have been pulling across the English countryside. Nobody on the German side is listening, or if they are listening, they are not believing. The idea that the British could fly a tank across the English Channel and land it in a field behind enemy lines, in the dark, intact, ready to fight, falls too far outside the boundary of what seems achievable. This is, Garrett thinks, the first advantage they have. The second is the aircraft itself. He knows it the way he knows his own hands now. He knows the way the tow rope goes light before it goes taut. He knows the angle of the cable in the darkness. The device they call the angle of dangle, 2 illuminated white lines on a dial that tell him whether he is above or below the bomber, without any visual reference at all. He knows the stalling speed with flaps down, 52 miles per hour, slower than a car on a highway, and the exact moment in the approach when he is committed completely and there is nothing left to do but fly it all the way to the ground. He knows Sten Cole in the same way, the way Sten holds his coffee cup, the way he goes quiet before a difficult flight, not from fear, but from concentration, like a man solving an equation in his head. The way he laughs after a good landing, short, exhaled, like a pressure valve releasing. They have been doing this for 3 years. They have been ready for a long time. On the evening of June 5th, 1944, Garrett walks out onto the Tarrant Rushton runway. The sky is overcast. The wind is from the southwest. 30 Halifax bombers are moving into position, and behind each one, attached by 350 feet of rope, with a telephone wire running through its core, sits a wooden aircraft with a wingspan of 110 feet and a 17,000-pound tank bolted to its floor. Garrett looks down the line of them. In the fading light, they look almost peaceful, enormous, improbable, and still. He finds Sten standing beside aircraft number 3. They shake hands. They don't say much. There is not much left to say that hasn't already been said over 3 years and 2,800 landings. The briefing is complete. The lashings on the tanks have been checked and checked again. The compressed air bottles are full. 1 deployment each, no more. Garrett climbs the ladder into his cockpit. He straps in. He checks his instruments. He picks up the intercom handset and hears, through 350 feet of rope and wire, the voice of the Halifax pilot who will drag him across the English Channel and release him over occupied France. He looks out through the cockpit glass at the runway, at the bombers, at the long line of wooden aircraft stretching away into the dark. For the men on those beaches, 1 shot is exactly enough. The English Channel at night is not a body of water, it is a void. Below the formation there is nothing, no horizon, no surface, no reference point. The Halifax bombers fly in a loose column, their navigation lights off, their exhausts shielded. The only evidence that Garrett Morrow is not alone in the darkness is the tension in the tow rope and the occasional voice of the bomber pilot crackling through the telephone wire. He is at 3,000 feet. The intercom gives him altitude, heading, estimated time to release. He gives it nothing back except confirmation. There is nothing to report. The aircraft is flying clean. The cargo bay behind him is holding. The tank is where it should be, lashed to the floor with chains. He checked himself at 1,800 hours and checked again at 2,100 hours and thought about checking a 3rd time before deciding that a man can only prepare so much before preparation becomes fear, wearing a different name. 30 aircraft in the air, 30 tanks crossing the English Channel in the bellies of wooden gliders. Garrett thinks about that for a moment and then decides not to think about it anymore. He checks his angle of dangle, 2 white lines on a dial. He is sitting slightly above the slipstream where he should be. The tow rope is taut. Everything is as it should be. Then, through the telephone wire, he hears something that is not the bomber pilot's voice. It is a sound, a low, grinding shift. The sound of mass in motion, of something very large moving in a space designed to hold it still. It lasts perhaps 2 seconds, then it stops. Then there is a sound like a wall coming down, and then the intercom from aircraft number 3 goes completely silent. Garrett knows what that sound means before his mind has finished processing it. The lashing chains on Sten's tank have failed. At cruise speed, behind a Halifax, a Tetrarch light tank that breaks free of its restraints becomes a 17,000-pound projectile in a 32-foot wooden tunnel. It does not stop. Physics does not negotiate. The tank travels forward until something stops it, and the only thing in front of it is the rear wall of the cockpit where Sten Cole is sitting. The intercom stays silent for 3 seconds. Then Garrett hears Sten's voice, once, very clearly, say his name. After that, nothing. Aircraft number 3 does not pull up. It does not veer. It simply ceases to be an aircraft and becomes a falling object, and the English Channel receives it at a speed that leaves nothing to find and nothing to recover. Garrett holds his course. His hands do not shake. He will think about that later, that his hands did not shake, and he will not know how to feel about it. In the moment, there is only the aircraft and the darkness and the tow rope and the 2 white lines on the dial telling him he is still where he should be. He crosses the French coastline at 0126 hours. Landing zone N, north of Ranville, is a field approximately 800 yards long and 400 yards wide. In daylight, it would be adequate. At night, in a 36,000-pound aircraft with 1 deployment of flaps and no ability to go around, it requires everything Garrett has. He hears the tow rope release with a sound like a gunshot. the tension dropping all at once, the nose dropping slightly as the weight of the rope falls away. He is at 1,200 feet. The field is below him, invisible in the darkness except for a line of hooded lights that the pathfinders have laid out. 4 dim amber points that define the approach corridor. He pumps the compressed air. The flaps deploy. He feels the aircraft's character change. The nose rises slightly, the speed bleeds away. The enormous machine becomes something slower and more deliberate, committed now to the ground below regardless of what the ground turns out to be. He has done this 2,800 times. He has never done it with a tank inside and a war outside. The ground comes up fast at the end, or it always does. And then the wheels hit, and the fuselage compresses, and the undercarriage takes the load, and the aircraft is running hard across a Norman field with its tail up and its nose down, and Garrett's hands working the rudders to keep it straight as the speed falls away, and the darkness rushes past the cockpit glass. It stops. He sits for a moment in the silence. Then he deflates the undercarriage struts. He hears the pressure plate engage on the cargo bay floor. He hears the cable and lever system operate, a sound like a large clock mechanism releasing. The nose swings open. The Tetrarch drives out into occupied France 47 seconds after landing. By 02:30 hours, the 211th battery is engaging German targets. The guns that were supposed to stop them are being destroyed by tanks that arrive from the sky. Major General Webb, commanding officer of the Airborne Division, writes in his report the following morning that it is impossible to express the relief he felt watching these reinforcements arrive. Garrett does not read the report. He is sitting against the wheel of his empty aircraft in a field in Normandy, looking at the sky. He is thinking about a sound that lasted 2 seconds somewhere over the English Channel. He is thinking about a voice that spoke his name once, clearly, in the dark. He is thinking about 3 inches of clearance on each side of a tank, and the chains that were supposed to hold it, and the specific mathematics of what happens when they do not. Sten Cole, 28 years old, is buried at the cemetery in Ranville. His grave is 3 kilometers from the field where Garrett landed. Garrett does not visit it during the operation. He tells himself there is no time. That is the truth, and it is also a convenient version of the truth, because the other version, that he cannot yet go to that place and stand at that ground and believe what it contains, is not something he can afford to be yet. He files his operational report. He notes the successful deployment. He notes the tank extraction time. He notes the field conditions and the approach corridor lighting and the wind at the time of landing. He does not note what he heard on the intercom at 00:43 hours over the English Channel. That is not the kind of thing that goes in a report. 3 months later, Garrett Morrow volunteers for Operation Market Garden. His commanding officer looks at him across a desk in a way that suggests this is not entirely surprising and not entirely encouraged. Garrett has completed his mandatory rest rotation. He is medically cleared. He is within his rights. Nobody says the thing that sits underneath the conversation, that men who volunteer too quickly after losing someone are sometimes flying toward the loss rather than away from it. Garrett does not examine his own motives too closely. He knows the mission. Heavy gliders carrying anti-tank guns and stores to support the 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem. 38 Hamel cars across 3 lifts. The landing zones are near Wolfhees, on ground that the reconnaissance photographs show as flat and firm. The photographs, it turns out, are wrong. He knows something is wrong the moment his wheels touch. The field near Wolfhees looks firm from the air. From the air, most things look like what you need them to be. On the surface, in the moment of landing, Garrett feels his main wheels punch through the top layer of soil and sink, not catastrophically, not immediately, but enough. The resistance is wrong, the deceleration is wrong, the nose is not coming down the way it should, because the tail is not rising the way it should, because the wheels are dragging in soft earth instead of rolling across hard ground. He works the rudders, he fights the yaw. He is doing everything correctly, and it is not enough because the problem is not the flying. The flying is over. The problem is the earth. And the earth is what it is. The tail comes up anyway. In a high-wing monoplane with the cockpit mounted on top of the fuselage, when the tail rises past a certain angle, the geometry becomes unsurvivable for anyone sitting at the highest point of the aircraft. The cockpit, 15 feet above the ground under normal conditions, swings forward and down in an arc that ends with it meeting the earth at a speed and angle that the wooden structure cannot absorb. Garrett feels the impact before he understands what is happening. Then he is on the ground. Then there is a pain in his right side that is extraordinary in its completeness. Then there is silence and dust and the smell of fresh-turned soil and hydraulic fluid. And he is looking at a panel of cockpit glass that is no longer in front of him but beside him, and he understands that the aircraft is on its side and he is still inside it. He gets out. 2 ribs, the medical officer tells him later. Clean fractures, both of them. He was fortunate. The aircraft beside him, number 12, did the same thing, tail up, cockpit down, and from number 12 there is no sound. There has been no sound since it stopped moving. 3 pilots do not get out of their aircraft. The medical officer does not comment on this. Some things are understood without being said. Garrett sits in a field in the Netherlands with his hand pressed against his right side and watches the operation unfold around him. He watches the anti-tank guns being unloaded from the gliders that landed cleanly by crews that were fortunate in their soil. He thinks about how a field looks from the air versus how it feels under your wheels. He thinks about the memo he should write. Market Garden fails. Not the Hamilcar operation specifically, not the glider pilot specifically. The failure is larger and more complete than any single element. A bridge too far, a timeline too optimistic, supplies that cannot reach men who need them badly enough to die waiting. Of 10,000 men who land with the 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem, 3,000 come out. Garrett Morrow is one of the 3,000. He is flown back to England on the 4th day, officially non-combat effective with 2 fractured ribs and a bruised scapula. He is given 6 weeks of medical leave. He spends the first week in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the specific silence of a ward where men are trying not to make noise about pain. In the second week, he asks for paper and a pen. He writes a technical memo to Frank Webb. 4 pages, handwritten, covering the specific failure mode of heavy glider operations on soft soil, the physics of tail rise, the geometric relationship between cockpit position and ground impact angle, the possibility of modified undercarriage load distribution that might reduce the risk on future operations. He draws diagrams in the margins. He calculates angles. He writes in the careful, specific language of a man who has been thinking about one problem for 6 weeks and about almost nothing else. He addresses it to Webb and sends it through official channels, not knowing whether it will arrive, not knowing whether Webb will read it, not knowing whether any of it matters at this stage of the war. What he knows is that there will be another operation. There is always another operation. And the men who fly it will face the same aircraft, the same physics, the same compressed air bottle, with enough pressure for exactly one deployment. They deserve every advantage that can be given to them. He returns to Tarrant Rushton in November 1944. The base is quieter than he left it. Some faces are missing. Some aircraft are gone. Nobody talks very much about Arnhem. There is a quality to the silence around that word. Market Garden, Arnhem, the bridge, that feels like a bruise that has not finished forming. Men walk around it the way they walk around unexploded ordnance, carefully, without looking directly at it. Garrett walks into the hangar where his aircraft is parked. He runs his hand along the fuselage, birch and spruce and plywood and steel at the joints, the same materials Webb described to him 3 years ago in this same building. He opens the nose section and looks into the empty cargo bay and thinks about what will go in there next time and what that means for the men who will be sitting inside it and what it means for the men who will be flying it. He closes the nose. He walks back out into the November light. Somewhere over the English Channel, in water too deep and too dark to matter, the wreckage of aircraft number 3 is lying on the seabed. Sten Cole, 28 years old, rests in Ranville Cemetery under a stone that Garrett has still not visited. He tells himself he will go there after the next operation. He tells himself that in the way men tell themselves things they are not yet ready to make true, holding the promise out in front of them like a landmark, something to navigate toward, something to keep the course, for when the darkness comes up around the cockpit and there is nothing to see except 2 white lines on a dial and a rope stretched tight into the void ahead. There is always a next operation, and somewhere in a planning room he will never enter, Montgomery is drawing lines across a map. The lines cross a river. The river is the Rhine. The briefing for Operation Varsity is held on the morning of March the 23rd, 1945. Garrett Morrow sits in the 3rd row and listens to a colonel explain the largest single-day airborne operation in the history of warfare. The numbers are extraordinary. More than 16,000 men, nearly 1,800 aircraft and gliders. A crossing of the Rhine in broad daylight, Montgomery's decision, justified by the argument that night operations had cost too much in coordination failures and navigational error. Daylight. Garrett has flown at night. He has flown through cloud and rain and the particular blindness of a blacked-out English countryside. He has always had darkness as a kind of armor, imperfect, unreliable, but real. The guns below him could hear the formation. They could estimate position, but they could not aim at what they could not see. In daylight, they will see everything. He looks at the man sitting to his left, a pilot named Aldous Briggs, 31 years old, who transferred to C Squadron after Market Garden as part of the replacement intake. Briggs is competent, he works hard, he asks the right questions, but he arrived 8 months ago on accelerated conversion training, and the Hamilcar is an aircraft that takes years to truly know. Garrett has been watching him since October, quietly and without comment, in the way that experienced men watch younger ones when the stakes are not yet visible. Garrett does not say any of this. He listens to the briefing, writes down his coordinates, and walks out into the March air with the same information he has carried into every operation. One approach, one compressed air bottle, no second chance. The difference this time is that he can already see the sky they will be flying into, and the sky is clear. The formation crosses the Rhine at 1,000 hours on March 24, 1945. Garrett is flying aircraft number 9. Behind him, in the cargo bay, a 17-pounder anti-tank gun and its crew sit lashed to the floor in the specific silence of men who have accepted what they cannot control. The crew sergeant, a man named Holt, has made this kind of journey before. He does not speak during the flight. He sits with his hands on his knees and his eyes forward, and he trusts the aircraft completely, the way infantry trusts artillery, without needing to understand exactly how it works. The flak begins before they reach the river. It begins as something abstract, black puffs appearing in the middle distance, the sound arriving a half-second after the sight, a series of flat, percussive thuds that Garrett feels in his chest before he hears them with his ears. At this distance it looks almost peaceful. Dark flowers opening in blue sky. Then the formation moves forward and the distance closes and it stops being abstract. The aircraft ahead of him, number 7, flown by a pilot transferred from another squadron 8 months ago, takes a burst of flak on its port wing. The wing does not come off. The aircraft yaws left, hard, then corrects. For a moment, Garrett thinks the pilot has it, then he sees the smoke. It is not engine smoke. It is the specific color and character of burning fabric. The pale grey-white of cotton and linen catching, spreading fast along the wing route where the fabric covering meets the wooden rib structure. Garrett has read the intelligence assessments that came through after Arnhem. the analysis of what the Germans had learned from examining Hamilcar crash sites, that the wooden airframe covered in doped fabric at low speed and low altitude presented an incendiary opportunity that conventional metal aircraft did not. He has read those reports. Reading reports and watching the reality are two entirely different things. Number 7 burns from the wing root to the fuselage before it reaches the landing zone. It goes in at the edge of the designated field, fast and uncontrolled, and it does not look like a landing. A column of black smoke marks where it stops. Garrett does not look at the smoke. Ahead, number 5 takes a direct hit that removes its entire starboard wing assembly. It rolls inverted in approximately 1 second and falls. There is nothing to be done for it. There is nothing to be done for any of it except to hold the heading and fly the approach and trust the 3 years and the 2,800 landings and the compressed air bottle that holds enough pressure for exactly what is needed. Garrett holds his heading. He holds his altitude. He waits for the release point. This is what nobody tells you about courage until you are inside it. That it is not the absence of fear, but the management of it. The deliberate narrowing of consciousness to the next required action. Fear is present. It sits directly behind his sternum like a stone. But between the stone and his hands on the controls, there is a distance he has spent 3 years learning to maintain, and in this moment that distance is everything. The tow rope disconnects at 1,400 feet. The nose drops. The speed bleeds away. He pumps the compressed air. One deployment, the bottle emptying as the flaps extend, and the aircraft transforms from something towed to something falling with intention. Below him, through the cockpit glass, he can see the landing zone, the tree line, the burning aircraft at the field's edges. He sees all of this the way a man sees things when his vision has narrowed to a corridor. Present, registered, filed and not yet felt, he flies the approach. He flies it the way he has flown 2,800 approaches. The same sight picture, the same control inputs, the same final arrest of descent as the wheels find the ground and the fuselage compresses and the load transfers and the aircraft is suddenly, irrevocably on the earth. He stays straight. He works the rudders. He stops. He sits for 3 seconds in the particular silence after a landing, that brief interval when the body takes inventory of itself and reports back on what has survived. Everything has survived. He deflates the undercarriage struts. The pressure plate engages. The nose swings open. Sergeant Holt and his 17-pounder roll out onto the eastern bank of the Rhine, and Holt does not look back. Garrett climbs out of the cockpit and moves away from the aircraft quickly. A stationary Hamilcar is a target, and there is nothing more to be done inside it. He has spent his one shot. The aircraft is now a very large and very flammable piece of furniture in a contested field. He moves toward the tree line that marks the rally point for C Squadron, and on the way he passes things he will carry for the rest of his life. He passes number 7, still burning. The fuselage has been almost entirely consumed. The wooden structure that Webb built from birch and spruce and laminated plywood that survived the English Channel, the fields of Normandy, the soft earth of the Netherlands, burns the way wood burns when it has been waiting for it, completely and without remainder. He passes a cockpit section where a pilot is still strapped into his seat. The fabric around the cockpit has burned away, and what is left is the steel reinforcement that Webb put at the load-bearing joints, blackened but intact. Garrett does not stop. He is 50 yards from the tree line when he hears it. The sound comes from his left, from a field adjacent to the landing zone where, through the smoke and dust of the morning, he can see a large wooden farm building, a storage structure of some kind 80 feet long, with a heavy timber roof and walls of old dry board. He watches a Hamilcar, Aldous Briggs at the controls, approach angle too steep, altitude too low, the compressed air bottle already spent or insufficient, hit the ground short of the landing zone, and skip forward on its belly across the last 200 yards at a speed that cannot be corrected, and a trajectory that ends at the wall of the farm building. There is no avoiding it. There is no correction available. The aircraft hits the building at approximately 40 miles per hour and goes through it. The wall disintegrates, the roof collapses inward. Timber beams that have been standing since before any of them were born come down in 3 seconds and raise a cloud of dust and splinter and broken tile that swallows everything inside. Garrett stops walking. He stands at the edge of the field and looks at the collapsed building and the dust cloud and the silence that has fallen over that particular piece of ground. Around him, the operation continues. Small arms fire from the tree line, vehicles moving, men calling coordinates across open ground. But in this small radius of attention, everything has gone still. For 4 seconds, nothing happens. Then he hears an engine. Not an aircraft engine, something lower, more deliberate, the sound of a vehicle engine turning over, catching, settling into the steady, mechanical rhythm of a Bren carrier running on cold fuel in a dusty field. The far wall of the farm building, the one that received the exit energy of the impact, bulges outward and falls. The Bren carrier drives through it. It comes out at walking pace, its tracks finding purchase on broken timber and scattered roof tile, its hull covered in white plaster dust and fragments of old wood. The gun mount is intact. The tracks are intact. The engine runs with the steady indifference of machinery that has not been informed it was in an accident. Aldous Briggs drops down from the wrecked cockpit section, now resting at a 45-degree angle against the building's remaining internal frame, and lands in the rubble beside his co-pilot. One of them brushes plaster dust from his shoulder with the precise, unhurried gesture of a man who has just stepped off a bus. The other looks back at the collapsed structure for a moment, a brief professional assessment, then checks his watch. They fall in behind the Bren carrier and walk toward the tree line. Garrett watches until they disappear into the smoke, then he laughs. It comes from somewhere he has not visited in a long time, not from relief, not from the release of immediate fear, but from something deeper and less rational, from the recognition of something that cannot be planned or engineered or written into any specification document. The aircraft is made of wood and glue and fabric and compressed air and the collective stubbornness of men who refused to accept that the problem was unsolvable. And it just drove a Bren carrier through a building and walked away. He laughs the way Sten used to laugh after a good landing, short, exhaled, like a pressure valve releasing. By 1800 hours on March 24, 1945, Operation Varsity has achieved all of its tactical objectives. The Rhine has been crossed, the bridgehead is established. Eisenhower will call it the most successful airborne operation carried out to date. The glider pilot regiment's casualties for the day exceed 20% of the 890 personnel committed. More than 60% of those killed are replacement pilots. Men given accelerated conversion on an aircraft that Garrett has been flying for 4 years. Men who did everything that could be asked of them with the time and training they were given. Garrett does not attend the evening briefing. He sits outside the medical tent with his back against the wheel of a jeep and watches the sun go down over the eastern bank of the Rhine, over the ground they have taken, over the fields where wooden aircraft are burning themselves out in the last light. He thinks about Sten Cole. He thinks about the sound on the intercom over the English Channel. He thinks about a name spoken once in the dark, over moving water. He thinks about a grave in Roundville that he has promised to visit. After the next operation, he said. After the next operation. This was the next operation. He goes to Roundville in the spring. The cemetery is quiet and very flat, and the stones are new, still sharp at their edges, not yet worn by the weather that will eventually soften everything. He finds the name without difficulty. The groundskeeper has given him a row and a number, and he walks to it across grass that is already growing green over ground that was a battlefield less than a year ago. He stands there for a long time. He does not say anything. There is nothing to say to a stone that Sten Cole would not have already known. They spent 3 years and 2,800 landings together. They had already said what needed to be said in the way that men say things now, not in words, but in the daily choice to show up and do the work and trust the man beside you with the thing that cannot be spoken. He puts his hand on the stone the way he put his hand on the fuselage at Tarrant Rushton. Cold, solid, holding its shape against the weather. He stays until the light changes, then he walks back to the car. He does not need to come back. What he came to confirm, he has confirmed. Sten Cole is not in the stone. He never was. January 1946. Tarrant Rushton. The war has been over for 5 months. Frank Webb is standing near the far end of the aircraft line when Garrett finds him. There are 44 Hamel cars remaining at Tarrant Rushton, 44 out of 344 built. The disposal order has been issued. Breaking up facilities have been contracted. The process will begin in 2 weeks. Webb looks older than Garrett remembers, not dramatically, but in the specific way that the end of enormous effort produces, slightly emptied, as though the thing that was holding him at a particular tension has been released. They've started the paperwork, Webb says. Garrett nods. He is looking at the aircraft. Standing in front of them in the January light, they look different than they looked in use. Larger, somehow, and more fragile, as though the purpose that animated them has already begun to leave. He walks to the nearest one and puts his hand against the fuselage. The plywood is cold. There are stress marks along the lower skin where the undercarriage struts have compressed and relaxed over hundreds of landings. There is a repair patch near the tail. Green-grey fabric over fresh plywood, where something struck it at some point and was fixed by someone whose name Garrett does not know. No complete aircraft will survive, Webb says. The wooden construction, the glue deteriorates. The plywood delaminates. Even if they kept them, they would lose them to the weather inside 10 years. I know, Garrett says. He is thinking about birch and spruce. He is thinking about a warehouse in Hanworth and a man with soft-edged paper and a question about how you fit a tank inside an aircraft and get it out again in under a minute. He is thinking about the answer. You build the aircraft around the hole, and how that answer contained inside it everything that followed: the Channel crossing, the fields of Normandy, the mud of Wolfhees, the burning fabric over the Rhine, Aldous Briggs walking out of a collapsed building and checking his watch, everything built around a hole. Sten Cole, Garrett says. He is not asking a question. He is saying a name in the presence of someone who will understand what it carries. Webb is quiet for a moment. I read the incident report, the chain failure analysis, a load distributor on the starboard forward lashing point, fatigue fracture, pre-existing. He pauses. These things happen at the tolerances we were working at. I know the margins, Garrett says. He says it without anger. He says it the way a man states something he has been sitting with long enough that it no longer requires a particular tone. The margins were what they were. The aircraft was what it was. Sten was 28 years old and he flew the mission and the chain failed, and that is what happened. Knowing why it happened does not change what it weighs. He takes his hand off the fuselage. He's still here, Garrett says. He puts his hand on his chest, over his sternum, over the place where the stone has been sitting since the intercom went silent over the English Channel in June of 1944. Whatever they do with the aircraft, however long the wood holds or doesn't hold, he pauses. He's in here. That's where he stays. Webb does not say anything. There is nothing to say to that, and Webb is a man who understands the difference between a problem that requires a solution and a fact that only requires acknowledgement. They stand together in the January light until the cold drives them inside. The Museum of Army Flying, Middle Wallop, Hampshire. In a gallery toward the rear of the main building, behind a rope barrier, and beside a descriptive panel that most visitors read briefly and move past, a section of Hamilcar fuselage, aircraft TK-777, rests on a low platform. It is approximately 8 feet of wooden structure, birch and spruce and plywood, the lamination intact in places and showing its age in others. The fabric covering is mostly gone. The steel reinforcement at the joints has surface rust but holds its shape. A placard identifies it as the only surviving structural section of its type. Most visitors spend less than a minute with it. It does not look like much. It does not look like a machine that crossed the English Channel at night with a tank in its belly. It does not look like the thing that put armor into occupied France for the first time in history, that flew into burning daylight over the Rhine, that drove a Bren carrier through a farm building and kept moving. It does not carry any visible record of the men who built it, or flew it, or died in it. Wood does not hold those things. Wood holds weight for a time, and then it gives. The names are what remain. Sten Cole, 28, Ranville, buried 3 kilometers from a field where a tank drove out of a wooden aircraft and opened fire before the dust had settled. The 3 pilots at Wolfhees who did not get out of their cockpits. The men over the Rhine whose aircraft burned before they reached the ground. All of them counted in casualty figures that exceeded 20% in a single day, in a regiment that already held among the highest loss rates of the entire war. No Hamilcar survives complete. There is a piece of fuselage in a museum. There is a section at the Tank Museum at Bovington recovered in 1990 from a farm in Wiltshire where it spent 40 years holding up a farmer's roof. Returned to daylight long after the men who built and flew it were gone, doing the last useful work available to it. That is what remains of the aircraft that carried tanks across the English Channel and changed what was possible. Wood rots, glue fails, fabric splits, only the names don't.